Okay. Hi. First statement, I'm very tired. This is not my time zone. We're going to talk about Never Done. It's an ever-evolving RPG workflow using Blender to build a world for Godot. Also a note, it's a very long slide deck, so we're going to go really quick. All right, about me. I am an indie dev working solo on an RPG. I also have a full-time job. Yes, I am tired. I started working in game dev basically in mud coding in the 90s. I've written a lot of C since then, a lot. I've never worked at a game studio, never worked at an animation studio. I am not an expert. But also at the same time, I care far too much about tooling. User experience for an engineer, workflows, anything that makes this easier, especially when I'm working alone. Background for this workflow. I am building just a classic fantasy top-down RPG. I want to build it in Blender effectively. I want to use Blender for designing the worlds, taking assets, reusing them, and connecting to get them together. On top of that, if I ever get lucky enough to work with an artist, I don't want them to have to run Godot at the same time, so the workflow can't depend on Godot running. Also, for the artist, the Blender viewport needs to match what the in-game viewport is going to look like, because it's really hard to make colors work when they don't match. Let's just start with where it is. This is the workflow. This is a tiny dungeon I built in Blender. We're going to drag it in, play the game. I got the little plushy dude. He goes in and he's in the treasure room. Okay, that's simple. We need more peril. The first thing I'm going to do in Blender is I'm going to remove that floor tile and I'm going to move the ground collider out of the way. Now there's a lovely hole in the ground. I'm going to drag in this little trap asset I made. Oh, I'm running out of breath. And drop back over and connect the door to it. I can easily connect this as a trap. Whenever the door opens, the trap's going to activate. I export that, go back into Godot, play the game. And he falls. It's fun. All of this behind the scenes is there's a GLTF pipeline effectively between Blender and Godot. In Blender, you can take any custom property and add a value there. When you're exporting to GLTF, those custom properties can be written as GLTF extras. When Godot imports it, it's going to take those GLTF extras and stick them in your node metadata as another dictionary called extras. There's some other things that Godot supports. You can set suffixes on your object names to make them turn into physics shapes. But generally this workflow, it's very manual. There's a reason why people have started building tooling around it. It's manual. Two workflows. These are the two that my work is based upon. The first one I ran into a couple of years ago was Blender-to-Godot pipeline by Michael Jared. This tool is it seems to be around rapid prototyping 3D levels. So you set up your geometry, you make all your meshes to make planes and boxes for people to jump on, and you mark those as, I want this to be a collision shape, I want it to be a physics body. The other workflow is DOGWALK. Last year, Blender Studio, they made a game in Godot. It's cute. You should go play it. It's free. They also released the entire pipeline and workflow and all the assets related to it. Within that, there is so much Blender best practices. It's incredible. Just go look at it. It is a deep, deep dive. This workflow is both based off of both of those, and sincere thank you to the authors of both of them, because I wouldn't be here if they hadn't released. Okay, core workflow. This is a big slide. We're going to skip over it pretty quickly. There's basically 4 phases that I consider in this entire workflow. There's the setup, which happens in Blender. There's the export that also happens in Blender. And then there's the Godot side, which is just importing the data. There's a 4th phase. It's the load phase. I shove that off into the game land. You can do whatever you want with the leftover GLTF extras that are on your node. All right, we're gonna Blender collections. This comes directly from DOGWALK. Kind of one of the, I'm going to use the naive phrase here, but not an insulting term. The naive approach I took when I first used Blender with Godot was one blend file is one asset. DOGWALK pointed out, and a lot of people were saying around the same time, with collections in Blender, you don't have to do that. You can set up collection exporters, and that lets you create multiple in-game assets in your single blend file. For those who haven't done it before, here is it simply. You're able to select any meshes you want on screen and group them together, throw them in a collection. The workflow that I have, there's an add-on in Blender. It sets up that collection for export. I've just set it for scene and GLTF extra. It set up the destination directory, which is in the game, and assigns an asset type. We export it, we go over to Godot, and we can drag in the actual asset. One thing to note here, I'm dragging in a scene file, a TSCN. This can be configured. Your collection can be configured to export GLTF or GLTF plus extra. Yeah, okay. That was the end of that. We could pull, oh, this is what happened next. From a static view, the collection itself becomes the root node for your GLTF scene. Any objects that are inside that collection are children of that. It's a pretty simple setup, but it's powerful. What this means is your one dungeon environment file that I have, my blend file, results in multiple assets. And I want to point this out. I took this from DOGWALK. I've started splitting my master assets, my art assets, from the actual game project. The reason is, well, one, working solo, I got tired of disabling auto import of the blend file. Number two, if you're actually working with the team, it prevents merge collisions and somebody else is on this file. I didn't need that, but I encountered a point. Now, when we start using this workflow, it allows us to leverage the Blender asset-based workflow. It's another workflow. Any collection I've created, I can mark as an asset, which lets us put it inside the asset, like, what's this tool? Asset library. You can save it in this file, and if you go over, I'm about to switch over to the tiny dungeon file and rip out two of my walls and drag in that same door asset and replace it. What this is doing is it's not copying the data in, it's just linking it. Sorry, I'm slow in Blender. Okay, now that I've made that change, I can actually export it to Godot, and it comes in. I can drag that dungeon into the scene, and yay, our tiny dungeon. It's similar. Now here's where the actual powerful part comes in. I can go back to that door asset and modify it, and then export just the door file. When I switch back over to Godot, all the doors are updated. I did not re-update the tiny dungeon. This is useful. From a static view, once again, it's the tiny dungeon scene is referencing those other GLTF files. It's not actually copying the data in. It says wall there. Imagine it said door. It's all the same thing. Behind the scenes. Ooh, okay. Blender made a lovely, Blender's just lovely. I found this out from DOGWALK reading through their entire add-on. There is a lovely extension there called the GLTF2 export user extension. I can't even count the number of hooks that are there. We use 7. We've got our pre and post import export, pre and post export hooks for basically just cleaning up that collection. We talked about linking in assets, like when I dragged in those doors. When we're generating the GLTF file, we don't want the geometry for those doors. We don't want the materials because they're in a different file. So we replace those with empties with just the asset ID on them. We do some other things. We do the similar thing with materials. We switch them to placeholders with the asset IDs. We also calculate some primitive shapes. The other set of hooks we use are the actual gather hooks. These are used for cleaning up and expanding the data. Some of the simple things we do, when you duplicate a rig, you end up with an armature and an armature.001. We strip off that 001 so your animation tracks actually line up. There's some stuff about enums. I don't need to talk about that. That's fine. On the Godot side, when we're actually importing the data, we use 3 hooks. We use a manufactured pre-import hook. In Godot, there's not a native pre-import. There are certain things you can only do before the import process starts, and DOGWALK had this. I'm going to thank them so many times. It hooks before the GLTF import happens, and they're able to modify the config before the import starts. So it lets them set many things we'll talk about throughout this. The GLTF hooks that we actually use, I only use the scene post-import, and I just use that to modify the scene tree that's coming in. This is based off the GLTF extras that are in there. I can use it to swap out nodes for scenes. Out of breath. There's a lot of slides. Okay, and we also have a post-import hook where after we've done all the GLTF processing, all the destination files have been created, we modify tertiary files to reference them. So you guys have heard me say asset ID a couple of times. Now I'll actually talk about what it is. Blender and Godot need to communicate what references are. DOGWALK used a JSON file for this. They had a JSON database containing the asset IDs. I actually had 2 of them, asset ID and file path, and where it's expected to find things. During their presentation, they talked about the fact that they started hitting merge conflicts with that file, especially when working in parallel. Around the same time they were making that, Godot came out with UIDs. Godot 4.4 added the UID as a resource path, which means I got lazy and I used Godot as the UID database. It's incredibly easy to do. You have to set one field in the .import file, and when Godot pulls the file in, it'll use that UID. Even if this didn't work, there were other paths I could have taken, but I'll be honest, I probably would have bounced off this if it hadn't. The scary bits. Blender and Godot, we're just picking UIDs arbitrarily and not consulting each other at all. There's a really small chance of collision here. We're talking about a 63-bit integer, and each of us are picking one value. There's no real risk here, but I'm a coward. I've got checking in place. I also game planned through everything that would happen, and the only scenario this would happen in is, well, first of all, Godot is never going to generate a UID that's going to conflict with itself. So the only place the concern comes from is Blender creating a new UID. Well, that's only going to happen when we first make a collection for export, which means we haven't linked that into a dozen other files, which means if the problem happens, it's going to happen the first time you import an asset, and it's really easy to change that asset ID at that time. Okay, level design. Level design is more than just physics and geometry shapes. It's about how we connect all the pieces together. It is that door being connected to that trap. We need state to actually build levels, but not too much state. We don't want to overwhelm a level designer with what you see in the Godot inspector panel. There's just too many buttons. So I reduce it. For example, there's very few nodes you can actually configure anything in Blender. It's really focused on the visual and the shaping. But for when you add a physics body into the scene, you can pick which type of physics body it is. It can be a static body, 3D, a rigid body. There's things like that. For assets, You get more flexibility. When we make those collections in the collection exporter, when we set that up, you can specify what type of collection you want that to be. It can be animation, it can be GLTF, or it can be a GLTF plus a scene. If it's a GLTF plus scene, it means it can have a script. If it's got a script, it has exports. And if it has exports, you can tag some of those for use in Blender. So we'll see a quick run through of that. I've got the door. It's got two property, closed and locked. When you go over to Blender, you can, of course, set those. And we set the door closed. Notice the door does not change. But the button does. You can go over into the editor, text editor. Sorry, I use an external editor. You can add a new property there for the trap, and we get a picker inside Godot. But that's not where I want to set it. I want to set it over in Blender. And we've got the picker. Yay! We can export this from Blender, go into Godot, and it works. Yay, that's really big. I haven't been looking back there. How does it work? Regexes. There is technically a library to do this, but I didn't want to figure out how to install a library inside of a Blender add-on, so I was like, I can regex this. And it's really not that bad. For the export variables, we tag them just by putting a comment in front that says Blender : and what type it is. That type really just represents how I want it to show up in the UI on the Blender side. On Blender, okay, when you select a new active object in Blender, basically click on a mesh, this is the Blender add-on. It will detect that change, check to see if that is a linked collection. If it's a linked collection with a scene, it will then check if there's a script. It'll go through and rip out all the exposed properties. Then it's going to create this dynamic property group. I have this on screen because this was really hard to figure out, and I wanted to share it. The good thing about this property group is it is directly on your object. So all the UI elements we saw on that side panel, when you change it, the modification happens right then. You don't have to hit any other button to save it. That's very important. All you have to do is export. On the Godot side, when you import, it's pretty easy. By the way, I drew this box forgetting that I had written that set scene property function. I thought that was just a thing. No, I wrote that, so this isn't very helpful. In that function, I check to see whether or not a property exists. I pull the property type hint, and I use it to convert what GLTF has into the proper thing. So for example, the Boolean flag of closed door, it comes across as a float. I don't know why, but it is a float. So I have to convert it back into a Boolean. Yeah, it's a little silly. Beyond the basics. Okay, this isn't a toy, but physics is still basic. I didn't want to reorganize that. Ooh, this is important. Collision shapes are explicit in the viewport. When I was using Blender-to-Godot pipeline, one of the features they have is you can mark any mesh as I will generate a collision shape for you and a physics body. That seemed great until I couldn't figure out where this freaking collision shape was coming from without going through the custom properties of a dozen boxes. I don't hide them. They are visible on screen. Number two, DOGWALK had this beautiful geometry node for creating primitive shapes for collision shapes. I took that and I split it out so it now has gizmos. So now I can drop my little thing on screen and use little arrows to make sure it's the right size, right shape, and fits my stuff. Because for me, that's a lot more easy to use than changing numbers on the side of the screen. Oh, I'll skip that. Doesn't matter. Talking about collision shapes, you can't have a collision shape without a physics body. If you didn't know that, now you do. Every collision shape needs a parent physics body. We've got two ways to create those. One, when you're setting up the collection, you can set the collection root node type to one of the different physics bodies. Once you do that, you can just easily add a collision object underneath it. Notice I am using prefixes for the names of objects for some of this stuff. I think it was somewhere on here. Number 2. Sometimes you need an explicit collision body, physics body. I've given this talk a lot in my head. In this case, okay, I have a modular wall system where I have all these reusable wall segments. If I throw 5 wall segments in a row, I don't want 5 physics bodies. I want 1 physics body, 1 collision shape. And there's a way to get around this, which is make the root of the entire map a physics body, but that just feels wrong to me. So instead, I added support for adding a body object. It's literally just an empty. There's no data in it. It's named body dash, and then you parent all your colliders for that section to it. It looks like this. It looks exactly like you would expect it to. Okay, now the real stuff. Animation. I have support for both rig-based and object-based animation. And also we have support for synchronous animation. That is, your character bends down, picks up a box, and puts it on its head. That's all in there. I took something from DOGWALK here. By the way, I fought this as hard as I could. You'll see later. There's only 1 animation scene per blend file. On top of that, the blend file is separate from your rig and mesh. If you've never done this, here is what it looks like. Also, I think this may be what a professional animation setup looks like. You drag in your asset with your rig and your mesh. You then have to make it, you have to make library overrides for it so you can actually modify the rig. Then for us, for our workflow, you take that rig, throw it in a collection, and name that collection what you want it to export as. This is necessary because the only things that will be exported are in that collection, and we want the rig. We don't want the mesh when we do the export. We go into the action editor, we set up a new action. That is the actual animation. Trust me, somebody on YouTube will thank me one day. All right, and then we actually set the animation type, the export type to be animation. That was it. At this point, you're able to configure all the animation. You're actually able to do the animation in here. When you export it, it's a pretty simple process. All it does is the straight GLTF export. But on the import side, the add-on in Godot will take that animation out of the GLTF and put it in a resource file. Not technically accurate. It'll reference it, but close enough. You'll get an animation resource file and link that into an animation library. So, as an actual example, that trap we set. This is the actual scene file for that trap. There is an animation player with an empty animation library in there. We're going to go into where I actually have the animation. I'm going to hide the parts of the scene that are just backdressing. That's not the right word. I'm going to export the actual animation, and as soon as I switch over to Godot, it's there. This is the key part of the workflow. There's very little actual work besides, the important pieces. What's important to notice here is a static view of it too. What's important here is anything you animate, any asset or character, it gets its own dedicated animation library. What that means is if you add 5 more animations to your door, one where your door blows off into the wind, they all end up in the same animation library and you don't have to add the new animations. Okay, I'll tell this part. The way this works, that pre-import hook from DOGWALK, it's able to set up that pre-export. It's able to set the import config prior to the import process running. So instead of having to go into advanced import, go to the right thing, select the animation, enter a path you want it to, The add-on does it all. Yeah, the rest of that's not important. I really, really want multiple animations per blend file. I've tried more than 2 times because I forgot to write down each time I tried it why it doesn't work, but now it's written down and I'll remember. That said, while I was writing these slides, I realized there may be a path using node retargeting and bone retargeting during import-export, but I haven't implemented it yet, so I can't say. Everything else, it's all the same tools. All of this is the same. For enemy placements on a Mac, you just drag and drop from your asset library. It's already got the scene associated. It's already got the script associated. It's just going to work like an enemy. For the patrol path, that's just I'm going to mispronounce this, Bezier curve. The points from that can map directly to a curve 3D inside Godot. All you have to do is put on your character, I want to export a path 3D, set the Blender type to object, and now over in Blender, you've got a little drop down, a little picker, and you can pick the curve. It'll come right across. Inventory. Do not do this until you have your inventory right and everything else works. It's very, very tightly coupled to how you're doing items in your game. On top of that, the Blender add-on then becomes tightly coupled to how you do add-ons in your game. What it's going to do is it parses your items however you store them. I recommend SQLite database just because it'll work well for this. It parses them all, stores them locally or caches them locally inside Blender. Then on the Blender side, you're going to use this lovely UI element called a template list. I don't know why it's named that. And do something like an export contents and then flag it as this is going to be my items. This is why it's tightly coupled to your game. Iteration matters. Every advance I've had in this workflow, by the way, this is the 5th or 6th iteration. It's because user experience friction is driving every last one of them. For Blender-to-Godot pipeline, it was the dynamically generated collision shapes. I didn't realize this, and I spent like an hour and a half debugging it, but if you mark a box as, okay, you have a collision shape now, and then you resize that box, you have to hit a button again to say that box has changed size, make a new collision shape for it. So none of my collision shapes work. I couldn't figure it out. It was just because I didn't click a button. That sent me down my first rabbit hole. Okay, this one's embarrassing. My game, every door in my game was in one blend file, which was one game asset, because I didn't want to go into Blender and export the door open and door close animations to a shared library. So instead, I thought it was faster to, I'll just hide the meshes for the other door models, and this will work fine. It worked. It was bad. The one thing that actually pushed me a little further to actually make some changes was recently, and this has recently been fixed as of 2 weeks ago, the fix got merged in. Blend files were not importing the vertex colors correctly all the time. And I just happened to pick the one case where it wasn't importing them. And I was like, okay, I'll look at DOGWALK again, because my initial impression of DOGWALK's workflow was, that's way too complicated for what I'm doing. It wasn't. It was just as complicated as it needed to be. Okay, my current UX friction. My material workflow is a tragedy. You have to create it in Godot. You create the material in Godot. You create the material in Blender. Then you go back to Godot, copy the UID, and then paste it into the Blender material. No. If you use a lot of materials, that's awful. You don't want to do that to anybody who's doing that work. On top of that, the textures are not exported from the art directory into the game directory. I am tempted to write a make file, but I know that's the wrong tool. Animation. On top of I want multiple actions per blend file, I also want a shared animation library for a shared rig. So for example, if I have 5 different humanoid characters all using the same humanoid rig, each of those characters has their own animation library right now. I want that humanoid rig to also have an animation library. It's possible, it's just not implemented. Oh, I complained about this earlier. I really wish the door state was actually visible in the viewport. When I say it's open, it still shows as closed. I have to go look at properties to see it's closed. By the way, that's the case both in Blender and in Godot. I can fix it in Godot with some tool scripts, but it feels like overkill. There is one problem here. Excuse me. DOGWALK mentioned this during their presentation, and I still haven't fixed the problem. If you duplicate one of those asset collections after you've set up export, you'll duplicate the asset ID, and that'll create a collision. But it's fixable. What's next? This entire workflow will be released under an MIT license. I'm still working on some CC0 dungeon assets for a demo project to release it with. It will include the Blender add-on and the Godot add-on. On top of that, documentation for everything. How to create new characters, how to animate them. Also documentation in the code explaining why I call a certain function or flip a certain flag. Very important. Finally, huge thank you to DOGWALK and Blender-to-Godot pipeline. Both these tools, I couldn't have done any of this if they had not released what they released. I would say questions, but that's 30 minutes and 57 seconds.